Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Okay. Are you ready, Matt, for the, okay, great. All right, well, I'd like to welcome you all here to the new Faculty Senate orientation for 2024. My name is Wayne Outen. I'm currently the chair of the Faculty Senate for one more year. And I'm glad that you guys are here in person. I'm also hoping maybe some folks joined in Teams. Why don't we just dive into it? So today we're going to be going through some introductions of the Faculty Senate officers, the Faculty Senate administrative support. We'll talk about how meetings are run for those of you that aren't familiar with parliamentary procedure or have not been in regular use of Robert's Rules of Order. We'll talk about that. We'll go through the roles of the faculty committees, the so-called standing committees that are separate from the Senate, but still interact quite closely with the Senate. And then later at the end of the presentation, the local USC AAUP chapter leadership will come by and introduce those of you that aren't aware of AAUP, what their activities are on campus. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions and answers if you still have some questions. So the officers of the Faculty Senate are shown here. There's the chair, myself. We also have a chair-elect who is Liam Hine. Liam wants to stand and be recognized by those in person. His picture is up here. We also have Marco Valtorta, who is not with us today. He's home recovering from an illness. He is our secretary of the Senate. And finally, we have the parliamentarian of the Senate, who is Dan Brackman, luckily from the law school. So that gives us a little extra gravitas with our parliamentarian. That's good stuff. So these four folks are technically the senators, or the officers of the Senate. And as I said, I will be the chair for one more year. My term will end next August, and at that point, Liam will take over for 2 years. And then at some point during Liam's term, there will be a new chair-elect elected. In addition, I'd like to introduce our Senate Administrative Coordinator sitting there in the back of the room, Ms. Kiana Walker. She just joined the Senate office this summer, so she's still somewhat in a learning curve, but she's doing a great job. She's mastered a lot in a few months. But if you need to communicate with the Senate office, she's basically the person at the other end of that email address. And hopefully we'll be able to meet any of your, or answer any questions or meet any of your, solve any of your problems that you may have during the year. Just to point out, the Senate office, or Kiana, I guess I should just say Kiana. Kiana's not only supporting the Faculty Senate in all of our meetings, she also supports pretty much all of the standing committees to some degree or another. And especially she supports the University Committee on Tenure and Promotion. That's really a massive job. A lot of files, upwards of 60 or 70 tenure and promotion files come through that committee every year. And Kiana plays an instrumental role in basically the logistics of how those are handled in Blackboard and the many, ballots and votes and other things that have to happen as part of that process. So she's a very busy person. If you email her and don't hear back right away, please be patient and she will get back to you, I'm sure. Kiana, do you have anything you wanted to add, or? Oh, maybe you'll wait maybe for the mic so that anybody online can also hear you. Sorry about that. I should have said that.
Yes, it is. Okay, here we go. Happy to be here. I normally respond within 24 to 48 hours. Any questions that you guys have, please reach out to that email. Also, it's not listed, but you can also get me at my personal university email, knwalker@mailbox.sc.edu. I'm here to help and glad to be here with you guys.
Great. Thank you, Kiana. Okay, so just a little bit about the Senate. Many of you may already be familiar with the role of the Senate. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have served previously as a senator? Anybody present? A couple, handful here and there? Okay, so you're familiar with how the Senate operates. For those of you that don't know much about the Senate, let me just give you a really brief introduction and we'll talk more about it later. The Senate has been delegated certain authority by the Board of Trustees to cover essentially these areas that are listed on the slide here, most of which deal with faculty matters, right? So research and scholarship, faculty welfare, and other things. We also have a great deal of control over curricular matters right? And we'll see from some of the standing committees later that they're specifically designated to deal with certain curricular matters that come before the faculty. Things that we don't control budget. We do have a budget committee that is mainly there for oversight and informational purposes that actually is very active, and they are very much integrated into the budget process, but they don't make decisions about the final utilization of money. The Senate does not make those kinds of decisions. So anything having to do with university finances, while we do have maybe oversight is even too strong of a word, we do have informational, I guess, access to that, to the budgetary process, but we don't actually make decisions. We make recommendations, and then the administration has the authority to make the final decisions, just to point that out. Okay, again, a lot of these things we'll cover as we go through some of the more important standing committees later in the presentation. Now, in terms of shared governance here at the University of South Carolina, the Faculty Senate fits into the picture as shown here. So we have the general faculty, which is basically all full-time faculty, including professional track and tenure track faculty. That is the general faculty. They are a body that meets twice a year, usually in September and April. They are also the final, especially at the April meeting, they are the final faculty authority on what goes into the faculty manual. They are not the final approval for that because the Board of Trustees is the final approval level for the faculty manual, but they are the last place where the faculty have input into that. The Senate is sort of one level below that. We're the sort of representative body for the university faculty. It's roughly one senator for every 10 faculty members that a unit may have. There's a chart in our in the appendices of the faculty manual that kind of lays it out a little more precisely. But we represent the faculty. We initiate changes to the faculty manual. Working with the standing committees, we address a lot of policy, curricular, and other types of issues for things that affect faculty and students. So we do play a really important role. We're pretty active all year round. You may not always hear about what we're doing, although I'm trying to push that information out better now, but definitely the Senate is always working on things as we go through the academic year. For example, last year, the Senate and the committees that were involved in that did a tremendous amount of work to pass the new professional track faculty section of the faculty manual. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, please go take a look. It's 12 new pages of material that deals specifically with rights and responsibilities of professional track faculty. Okay, and then as I said, the standing committees are also involved in the shared governance. They interact with the Senate. They are supported by the Senate. Those committees, though, are not necessarily senators. In fact, most of them are composed of faculty members that are not senators. They're just faculty who are willing to serve on the various committees. I'll talk more about the standing committees in a little while, but they deal with very specific areas under our purview in the faculty governance structure. Just a little logistics about the Senate itself. We meet once a month, we also have the ability to have a called meeting if we need to, which we've done before for various reasons. But our regular scheduled meetings are once a month, usually the first Wednesday of the month, although occasionally there are conflicts where we have to move a week off. Like, for example, in September, the general faculty meeting is the first Wednesday, and so we meet the second Wednesday. The Senate website will typically have the schedule for at least the semester up on the website. Also, we'll have, as we get closer to meetings, we'll begin to post documents under a meeting, under that specific meeting, including the agenda, which will be distributed before the meeting and that kind of thing. Yeah, so that brings me to the agenda. The agenda is distributed about 1 week prior to the meeting. That's done to all faculty, not just senators. So usually all faculty will get that email. Whether they look at it or not, I can't say, but they definitely get it. If you as a senator have an item that you would like added to the agenda, you have until, I believe it's the 20th in the faculty manual. Typically, I'm pretty flexible with that. If you get it to me before the 1 week ahead deadline, I'll consider it to go on the agenda. The value of that is that it makes sure that we discuss it. If it's on the official agenda, we will discuss it in the faculty Senate meeting. You can always bring something up on the floor of the Senate, but depending on time and other variables, we're not obligated to discuss something brought up during the meeting. Okay. I mean, usually we still try to do that. We try to accommodate senators, but by our bylaws, if you get it on the agenda by communicating with me, then that item will definitely be discussed. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have the 20th of the month. Again, that's supposed to be the prior month before the Senate meeting. I'm pretty flexible with that. That's quite a ways ahead. If you at least get it to me within the 7 or 8 days prior to the Senate meeting, I'll definitely consider it. Keeping up to date with what's going on in the Senate. Well, first off, please attend the meetings. You can't vote in a Senate meeting unless you're physically there. We do stream all the meetings using, I guess now it's Teams Town Hall. So you can definitely watch the Senate meeting, even if you can't physically be there, but we require you to be there in person to vote, unless there's some public health emergency that requires us to meet remotely. At the Senate meetings, that's where all the action is happening typically. So please make sure you come. That's one good way to stay abreast of what's happening. The Senate website is also very important. As I said, we'll be posting all the agenda, all the minutes from the previous meetings, all the documents you might need for the upcoming meeting. Those will all be up on the website approximately a week before, maybe 3 days to a week before the actual meeting. So that's good to go by there periodically and check that out. I'll also mention, if you're interested in Senate history, there's a recording of all the meetings that is maintained on the Senate website, and then eventually they get archived into the university archive system, but they can be accessed back years and years if you really want to go and look at the minutes or find a recording of a previous meeting. Another thing that some of you may not be aware of is that technically every unit on campus, and by unit, I'm really referring to more at the college or school level, every unit on campus does have a caucus of senators that, in theory, that caucus could meet and discuss matters about the Senate separately if they want to coordinate their efforts or have a more focused discussion on how it might impact their college. If you want to reach out to your caucus, please contact me. I did not have the distribution list here today for the caucus leaders because that needs to be updated, so it wasn't quite ready to distribute, but I can definitely do my best to put you in touch with the leader of your caucus for your particular college. Not all colleges and schools are equally active for their Senate caucuses. I'll just point that out, but technically they do exist, and they are a mechanism where you can talk about things outside of Senate meetings that impact the Senate. And then finally, I try to keep the amount of communications I send out to you at sort of a low boil, but sometimes things are important that I get the information out. I will occasionally send emails to all the senators. The provost sends emails that sometimes are quite relevant for action that comes before the Senate. So please try to at least take a look at some of those broad communications that you get from the provost and the administration, because occasionally they'll be very, very relevant for something we need to talk about at the Senate. Okay. And I'll just close this introduction section with some useful website links for those of you that don't have them already bookmarked on your browser. The Senate website, the current version of the faculty manual, which was approved in June of this year, as well as the link to the university policies and procedures website maintained by the provost, which is quite a large number of policies, but on the other hand, it's a good resource to go to when you have a very specific question about what is the university policy on something, for example, external speakers or that sort of thing. All right. Are there any questions for me just in this short introduction material before I turn it over to our parliamentarian? No. Can you tell if there are questions online, Matt, or is that possible? There are none. Thank you. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Dan Brackman, our parliamentarian, for his presentation. Yes, sir. Yeah, would you mind using the mic? There's a couple down front, and then I'm not sure what happened to the one in the back there, just so the folks online can hear.
Of course. Thank you. Maybe this is really obvious, but so I come from the Department of History. It seems like the number of our senators seems to fluctuate a little bit from time to time, and maybe it's through accident or carelessness. Somebody turns out not to be able to make it regularly, and so on. But is it the case that the unit, a little bit like the U.S. House of Representatives, like the number of senators from each unit is a proportion of its size or something like that, or is it arbitrary? Because I would think that otherwise, if one unit suddenly decided to send 10 senators, then it could have like an outsized, influence in the faculty senate. So does that, I'm sure the answer of does it matter is that yes, it matters, but how does that work exactly? Thanks.
Yeah, good question. I sort of alluded to it, but didn't really get very much in detail. The faculty manual and the appendix, I forget if it's the bylaws or the standing rules, probably the standing rules. Okay. Yeah, and this, we're pretty sure in the standing rules of the faculty manuals, sorry, the standing rules of the Senate, which is an appendix in the faculty manual, it does lay out very specifically how the apportionment works for senators. It's typically one senator for every 10 faculty. And as I said, both professional track and tenure track are counted in that total faculty number. And there's a chart in there that lays it out, like if you had 12 instead of an even 10, like how many senators you get, that sort of thing. So there is a chart in that appendix that lays all that out very precisely. I will say that the faculty manual, that appendix, does leave it a little bit up to the unit, meaning pretty much at the college level. How do they apportion? Like, for example, the college could take their entire faculty body and then come up with a number, and then how they apportion out that number of senators to the whole college is a little bit up to them. In my experience, has typically been left to the department, though. So a department counts their faculty. They get whatever the number of senators are based on the number of faculty they have, and then they have a vote to elect those faculty. But that does require each year, right, that the departments recount how many faculty they have, if they've hired new professional track or whatever, and then come up with that number and elect the right people. Is that answer your question? Was there an online question? Can you read it to me?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Someone asked, they said, I thought those of us who were senators up at School of Medicine Greenville were able to vote via Teams. Is that not the case?
That is correct. I apologize for leaving out that one exception. The senators from the School of Medicine Greenville, which is part of the Columbia, I guess the Columbia, not the system is the wrong word, the Columbia part of the USC system, they are allowed to attend remotely and vote remotely because they're up in Greenville, and it's a lot to ask them to drive down here just for a Senate meeting. So that is correct. They're the only ones allowed to vote online or through virtual participation. Anything else? Right.
So as Wayne has mentioned, my name is Dan Brackman. I am the parliamentarian for the Faculty Senate. I'm going to start my remarks by saying Wayne was right initially. The proportionment of senators to units is in the bylaws of the Senate, Article 2, Section 2. I looked it up while he was answering the other question. So I want to start by saying, what is the purpose of parliamentary procedure, other than to just sort of be confusing? Fundamentally, the parliamentary procedure is there to make larger meetings, like 75, 150 senators, whatever, run more efficiently and to run fairly. The whole principle is that the body is going to act according to the will of the majority of the members. But in so doing, we've got rules in place that are there to protect the rights of minorities, especially larger minorities within the Senate. Typically, one of the most important rights that is getting protected is the right to debate, discuss, deliberate things. Even if eventually the minority is not going to win the point, they still get to say their piece on it. It also serves to keep meetings on track. And at the end of the meeting, everyone should come out of it knowing exactly what was decided. We're academics, so we probably have all been in meetings where we sat around for an hour, hour and a half, talked about a bunch of stuff that kind of wandered around, and then left the meeting not entirely sure what we decided to do. Parliamentary procedure is designed to avoid that and make sure that everybody knows what was done and do it in a formal way, and that is actually the most efficient way to run a meeting. Parliamentary procedure works according to a sort of hierarchy of governing documents. At the very top, we have law. These are things like the Open Meetings Law and the Sunshine Law and other South Carolina and potentially federal laws that we have to obey. That is our highest authority. Below that is the faculty manual. What it says governs. Underneath the faculty manual, we have the bylaws of the Faculty Senate itself, which cover a lot of our basic operating things. But then further below that, we've got standing rules that cover some of our very specific parliamentary oddities. And finally, our lowest authority is Robert's Rules of Order, which is kind of the catch-all to cover everything else so that we don't have to write a faculty manual that's this thick, or bylaws or standing rules. Parliamentarians will tell you that 90% of this book is not used 90% of the time. There's a whole lot of very specific sort of cases that you don't run into a lot. If at the end of my talk, and I'm going to be giving you in a few minutes a 30,000-foot view of parliamentary procedure, you want to know more, I would recommend starting with this, which is Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in brief. This is designed for presidents of organizations, secretaries of organizations, things like that, to sort of be able to read, digest, and understand without having to try to become an expert on all of this. And actually, I had a slide on that. But according to our bylaws, this is our parliamentary authority. So there are other parliamentary authorities out there. Roberts is the most common, and it is the one we have formally adopted here. Part of parliamentary procedure is meeting etiquette. Obviously, arrive on time. But also, we will have designated senator seating areas. Usually, it will be all but the last two rows. And then we will have guest speakers in the front row. That is so when we have to start taking votes, we can easily see, because we look at the senator rows to see who's voting. If you're sitting in the back two rows in the non-senator seating and you try to vote, we're going to ignore you. All right. So make sure you are sitting in a designated senator space so that we count your vote. At various times, you will need to do what is called obtaining the floor. In standard Roberts, you would have stand up until the chair recognizes you. Here, because we're recording meetings and we're broadcasting them via Teams, you will come usually to one of the two microphones and sort of wait for whoever's at the podium to recognize you. They may or may not know your name, but they will indicate you at which point you need to introduce yourself and state what unit you're from. That's for the secretary, because the secretary is trying to write down who spoke. And they may come running up to you later and say, how do you spell that? Okay. And just as a matter of sort of formal etiquette, when you are speaking at the microphone, you are technically addressing all of your remarks to the chair, even if you are debating with someone else. And that's theoretically designed to sort of cut down on the friction between members by keeping the discussion between a neutral chair and various parties who are advocating pro or con on something. So you've probably heard the term motion in the context of parliamentary procedure before. The whole purpose of the meeting, after all, is to make actionable decisions. And the process for making those decisions starts with a member making a motion. The motion is a formal proposal by a member that the assembly, the Senate in this case, takes some specific action. All right. The Senate should not be debating anything unless there's a motion in front of it. That's back to that efficiency thing. We are not going to talk about stuff unless it's actually going to matter. So no motion, no discussion. Once there's a motion, then we can have discussion. How do we handle motions? You obtain the floor. You are recognized by the speaker. You say, I move that, and say what you want it to be. Your motion needs to be precise. In as much as the Senate votes on specific words. All right, and I'm going to come back to hit this a couple of times, but you would not make a motion that, actually, I'll pull out my example now. If we had a motion on the floor that said that the Senate should serve cookies at every Senate meeting, and somebody stands up and says, well, I move we amend that by adding some other foods. That's not specific enough, all right, because nobody knows what those foods are. You need to stand up and say, I move that we amend that by adding comma, fruit, and water after the word cookies. There's something that's specific. When you do that, everybody now knows exactly what we are proposing to do, and they can add their own changes. But if all you do is float an idea, we're kind of left with, okay, but who's going to stick the language in here? Because sometimes specific language can change shades of meaning rather dramatically. Main motions are the principal vehicle. In fact, they're the only vehicle by which new business comes before the Senate. You can only make a main motion when there's nothing else on the floor. These are the sort of the big things that come out. They must also be a concrete proposal, just like all other motions. The chair has the option to require that main motions be in writing. The chair usually won't try to do that. That's, again, largely for the secretary, who has to record the text of the motion in the minutes, because we have to record exactly what was passed. And sometimes, if the chair thinks the motion as it was stated is unclear, the chair can have a little back and forth dialogue with the movement in order to sort of clarify the language. And the movement will be like, okay, that's the motion I want. At which point, well, not at which point, I'm going to pause for my aside here. There is also something called a resolution. A resolution is basically just a main motion in fancy dress. All right, this is one of those things where it says, whereas X, whereas Y, whereas Z, and thus, therefore, and so on, be it resolved that. All right, it has no more effect than just a plain motion. And they can be a little complex to wield, because sometimes everyone in the room will agree with the be it resolved part, but they will disagree with the whereases. And you will lose votes sometimes because you can't get everybody on board with your whereases. So frequently, it's almost better to just float it as a motion with no whereases. They can come out in the debate, but at the end of the day, you vote on just the concrete resolution portion. But that's up to you. So back to advancing motions. Once the motion has been made, clarified, the next thing that needs to happen is somebody has to second it most of the time. There are a few motions that do not require a second. They are usually those motions where a member is asserting a right. Otherwise, most of the motions you're going to see require a second. The second does not have to come to the microphone and get recognition. The second merely needs to say, I second or second. Also, seconding a motion does not mean you agree with it. It simply means that you think it's something that needs to be discussed. You may even think it needs to be discussed because you think it's going to be defeated, and that gets it out of the way. Either way, anybody can second it, but once two members have said they essentially want to discuss something, the movement and the seconder, then it becomes the business of the Senate. And at that point, the chair is then going to restate the motion. So it has been moved and seconded, that, and restated. When the chair does that, the motion ceases to be the property of the movement and becomes the property of the body. The effect of that is you cannot withdraw a motion once it has been stated. And people will try to do this. Like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I wouldn't withdraw my motion. You don't just get to decide. The body has to let you withdraw your motion. Usually, that's not terribly difficult. The chair will use a procedure called unanimous consent that I will talk about in a little bit, and the motion will be withdrawn. But understand that as a technical matter, just because you made the motion doesn't give you a unilateral right to withdraw it. It also means that once the motion has been stated, the movement doesn't have the right to edit it anymore without the consent of the body. So if somebody says, well, there's a typo or you should have used a different word, and the movement says, oh, yeah, I agree, I should have used a different word, I want to amend my motion, they can't just do it. Again, we'll get to that unanimous consent. The chair will say, does anybody object to making this change? If no one objects, we make the change and we're on down the road. It's not supposed to be obstructionistic, but it is important to recognize the body owns the motion at that point. After that, we have debate. There are other motions that can be made during debate. And then finally, when debate is done, the chair puts the question, which usually involves restating it again. When we vote, the chair announces the result, and we move on to the next item of business. So let's talk about debate. One of the fundamental parliamentary rules is that you only debate one motion at a time. This prevents us from getting confused about what is being discussed and what is being decided. And there is a priority system that will have motions, like if you have a motion that's on the floor, a main motion, and somebody moves to amend it, then we're talking about the motion to amend, not the main motion. But it's still only one motion that's in front of us at a time. When members are discussing, and it's called speeches during debate, when members are giving speeches, their speeches must be germane to the motion that is on the floor. So if there's a motion and then there's a motion to amend it, and somebody stands up and starts giving a speech that has nothing to do with the amendment, that is not germane. And the chair can call you out of order and tell you need to wait until we've disposed of the amendment before we get back to discussing what you want to talk about, and then you'll get to, stand up and give your speech then. There are limits to how long and how much a senator can speak on a single motion. The rule is that a senator, or in any assembly, the default rule is members get 2 speeches of not more than 10 minutes each on any one given motion per day. If somehow you use your 2 speeches, the motion doesn't get resolved, somebody postpones it, it comes up in the next meeting, you have 2 more speeches of 10 minutes, right? If you've used your 2 speeches on the motion and then somebody proposes an amendment, you get 2 more speeches on the amendment, okay? But it is designed to sort of keep things from getting too terribly repetitious. Please don't feel that you have to use your full 10 minutes. Most people don't. They'll stand up, they make their point, and they sit down, and everyone loves them, okay? You cannot, however, save or transfer time. So if you use 5 minutes of your 10, you can't say, like in the House of Representatives, I reserve 5 minutes of my time, or I give 5 minutes of my time to my colleague from history. You can't do that. It's yours. You use it or you lose it. During your time, when you are giving your speech, you can allow other members to ask you questions, especially if they want to clarify some argument you're making. You do not have to. And that's important because even when they're talking to ask you a question, your 10 minutes is still running. All right. So if you let them ask you an 8-minute question, you have 2 minutes left to work with of your own time. There is a preference system in debate. Once a motion is made, the chair will move to recognize the person who made the motion. They traditionally have the first right to speak on it. I move that we serve tea and cookies at every Senate meeting. Seconded, the chair says there's been a motion that we have tea and cookies at every Senate meeting. Mr. Brackman, would you like to say something about that? And I will explain why it's a wonderful idea that we have tea and cookies at Senate meetings. After that, senators who have already spoken once are prioritized behind senators who have not spoken. So if you have not yet spoken on a subject, you should be able to speak before anybody else who has already given a speech. And then finally, the chair, to the extent possible, should be alternating between pro and con speakers, because the point here is to have a debate or a discussion, right? So those are sort of the preference rules for how we choose who gets to speak. And beyond that, it's, within those rules, it's who got to the microphone first. Okay. Or if you're in a different non-microphone setting, like your 4-H or something, it's whoever stands up first or raise their hand first. Unanimous consent. This is one of my favorite topics because it saves so much time. Unanimous consent is a procedure that you use to move through routine and uncontested business quickly. So basically, if the chair thinks that it's something routine and that nobody's going to object, or it's obvious that no one's going to object, the chair can say, if there is no objection, we'll allow this amendment. And if nobody pipes up, the amendment passes and we move along. Notice we didn't have to have debate. We didn't have to have a vote. We just saved ourselves 2 or 3 minutes. All right. And this pops up in all kinds of different contexts in the rules of order. But when you see this happening, that's what's going on. The chair is trying to move business along. It is your right to object. If you feel that business is moving too fast, that something is not being considered, you're a senator, you have rights. One of those rights is to object, at which point we will slow down and get into a more formal procedure to deal with something. Voting. When we vote on something, we always vote on the issue exactly as it is stated by the chair when they put the vote. In other words, debate is ended, they restate the motion, they will explain if it's a little confusing. An aye vote means that you're voting for this, a nay vote means you're voting for this. But however they state it, that's how we're voting. If you have a question, you have a right to ask the question. Like you don't understand something, by all means, get clarification before you vote. Most of the votes that we do in here are going to be voice votes. So the chair will say those in favor say aye, those opposed say no. And if it seems to the chair that it's clear that more people said aye than no, they will say it passes. If they're not certain, they have some other votes they can fall back on, including retaking the vote by a counted show of hands and some other methods. But most of the votes in here will be voice votes or simple show of hands. We have two voting standards that we generally work from. One is majority, which means more than 50%. So for something that requires a majority, if you have 100 people in the room, 51 have to vote aye, assuming they're all voting. And that's important also. When we talk about votes in the Senate, we mean those who are present and voting. So if you have 150 people in the room and only 100 of them vote, 51 voting aye will pass it because only 100 were present and voting. This means that abstaining does not affect the result. And then there's a persistent myth out there that abstaining is like a no vote. It's not, because you don't count for the number that we use to determine majority or 2/3. 2/3 is the other voting standard. You see it most often on especially weighty matters. You see it when the Senate is changing its mind about something we've done before. It should be harder to undo something that we've already done. And you see it on any vote that affects the rights of senators. And we'll see one of those kinds of motions here in a second. Generally speaking, it takes 2/3 to pass a 2/3 vote, not more than 2/3. So slight difference there. Here's a quick example of what this would look like. I move we serve coffee and donuts at every meeting. Second, the chair says it's moved and seconded. We serve coffee and donuts at every meeting. Is there any discussion? If there's discussion, it happens. Then there's a vote. The chair takes the vote and the chair announces, yes, it's passed. We're going to serve coffee and donuts at every meeting. The next item of business is X. Other frequent motions. The first one I want to talk about is a motion to amend. You have to have the floor, but you have to be recognized, and you need a second. This is what you do when somebody else makes a motion, there's a main motion pending, and you want to suggest a change to it. We see some amount of wordsmithing. I'm not specifically looking at the English department senators, but I've seen some come from some of them. I remember a discussion once that, we need to use the word which, not the word that. But there are other more substantive changes that people will add, or they'll say, well, you didn't think about this, so we need to put in this exception language, or we need to take out this piece of language. All of those are motions to amend. We're changing the motion before we vote on it. All right. Amendments must be specific. This is back to that. You can't just say, well, if the motion is that we should serve cookies at Senate meetings, I think we ought to serve something else. Not specific enough. You need to say the specific words you want to add or subtract and where they go. Not all motions can be amended. The main motions and most of the business that we deal with here can be amended, but not always. It's also important to realize that you can only amend down the rabbit hole so far. So a main motion can be amended. An amendment, a motion to amend a main motion can be amended. But you cannot amend a motion to amend a motion to amend a main motion. All right. No tertiary amendments. You can only go 2 steps down and you're done. Then you have to vote and move back up and come down again. And finally, motions to amend are going to be debatable if what they are trying to amend is debatable. All right. And the reason for that is the things that are not debatable are either things about which there really is nothing to debate, or which are designed to move procedure along. And it makes no sense to allow somebody to amend that and then throw a whole debate cycle in there if the whole purpose is to move things along. So if it's not debatable, the motion to amend it is not going to be debatable. Another motion you will see with some regularity is a motion for the previous question, or it's also called a motion to close debate. If this motion passes, it immediately ends debate and you immediately vote. This is not a debatable motion because it's designed to move things along. Somebody says, I move the previous question. Somebody says second. The chair should say, all right, we are voting on whether or not we're going to close debate. All those in favor say aye. There's no discussion. And that's because if you're trying to move things along, debate would just allow people to slow it down again. You do have to have recognition. There is a rumor in some circles that all you have to do is yell question to move the previous question. That is not true. You need a second. You need the floor. And because this abrogates the rights of members to debate, this is one of those things that requires a 2/3 vote. So a majority wanting to, close debate is not enough. And that's because members' rights are affected. Other common motions. You will see motions to commit, also called refer. So somebody proposes something, there's some discussion, we maybe decide we need more information about it from the provost, or we want somebody to go do some fact finding. Somebody will say, well, I think that we should refer that to the curriculum committee to investigate. And then we move on down with that motion. If it passes, then it's going to leave the Senate. It goes to the committee. The committee's going to deal with it. They will issue a report back at a later time. All right. Another motion that you sometimes see is division of the question. Where this one comes up is that courses and curricula will propose a slate of here are 100 courses that we want to, approve. And somebody will say, well, I object to, course XYZ 125 because it completely duplicates something in my department. And I don't think it's been well thought out. We already teach this. There's no reason for this course. Rather than bring the entire 100 course package to a stop while we debate 125, what we will do is divide the question, and we're going to separate 125 out from the other 99. We will then vote on the other 99 to which there is no objection. They will pass, and then we'll come back and debate 125. Right? So that's where you'll see a question getting divided. You can move sometimes to suspend the rules. We have done that a few times. Usually we're suspending rules relating to something called notice, which I will talk about in a bit. But it is possible. Suspending the rules is another thing that usually requires a 2/3 vote because we're changing the rules. It is important to note, if we ever do a motion or you want to do something that suspends the rules, you don't move to suspend a specific rule. You don't say, I want to suspend Senate standing rule number 2. You say, I want to suspend the rules to allow us to debate this longer, or I want to suspend the rules to waive notice. Okay. You state what your goal is, and then the group will vote on whether or not we suspend the rule to achieve that goal. Then there are 2 other motions, postpone and tabling. And there's a difference, and that's kind of where I want to dwell. But postpone is the motion you use if something has come up in the Senate and you don't think the Senate is really prepared to discuss it. You want to see it discussed in the next Senate meeting when you've got time to go back and talk to people in your unit who might know more. So you move to postpone this to the next meeting or to some other definite and certain time. If it passes, then it's postponed. Tabling is common. People will commonly refer to, I want to table that. And they mean postpone. But what table is something that you do as a temporary measure because something has come up. the building is on fire. I would like to table this motion while we all exit the building, or the fire alarm's going off. Let's not say the building's up. The fire alarm's going off. I want to table the motion. We'll exit. When we come back, we want to take it up off the table. Tabling is only ever temporary. If you leave something on the table too long, it falls off, which means it dies. So if something gets tabled, you need to pull it back. And there's a motion to pull it back off the table that I'm not going into. But understand that there's a difference. Most of the time, if you want to move something to another meeting, you're wanting to postpone it. Other common parliamentary actions. As members, you have the right to ask requests for information and to ask parliamentary inquiries. The difference is if you are trying to figure out how to do something in a parliamentary manner, you can ask the chair, or you can ask the chair, how would you rule on this? And the chair will give you an opinion. Probably talk to me first, but the chair will give you an opinion. All right. It relates to procedure. Requests for information are things where you feel that you need information, like you're debating whether or not we want to start some program and you want to know what effect is that going to have on the budget for the College of Arts and Sciences. You can ask the question. The officer may or may not know. If we've got the president or the provost here, they may be able to answer those kinds of questions in the moment, but that is a request for information. It's not a question about procedure. You can raise a point of order, which is a step above a parliamentary inquiry. That is the point where you're saying, I think we're doing something wrong from a parliamentary procedure. Now, for example, somebody says, gets recognition, says, I want to move the previous question and close debate. The chair says, okay, well, we're going to have a vote on that. Point of order, they need a second. And then we have to wait and see if they get a second. All right. You're basically saying, hey, we're making a mistake. Approval of the minutes, I just want to touch on it because you will see in a lot of context, people will ask for a motion to approve minutes. We don't actually need a motion to approve minutes. Here are the minutes. The only way you can object to the minutes is to offer a correction. If you don't have a correction, you can't object to the minutes. And if nobody is objecting, here comes that unanimous consent thing. Nobody's offering a correction. The minutes are approved by unanimous consent and we move on. We don't have to have a vote. We save time. Finally, there is something called notice. And this comes up on especially important things. You will see a committee chair. For example, if we are talking about changes to the faculty manual, the FAC committee chairs will usually stand up near the end of the meeting or during their report and they say, next meeting, we are going to make this motion as a committee to put this change in. All right. They are giving you formal notice that that is on the agenda next meeting. The whole reason to do that is so people who really care about these weighty decisions know that they have to be here next meeting. All right. And we should be pretty much discussing, or at least starting our discussion with the version that you just got previewed to you in the notice. All right. So when you see that happening, know that's kind of the operation that's going on. Finally, my role as parliamentarian is an advisory one. My job is to be neutral. I don't get to vote. I don't get to debate. But I do get to answer questions. So if you want to know how to do something in a parliamentary way, I'm available to you every bit as much as I'm available to the chair. You can reach out to me and say, hey, how do I do this? Or what would be the way to accomplish this goal? And I will try to work with you to figure out what is the best way to do that. Or at least what is a legal way to do that, or what are your options? During the meeting, I'm sitting up here and really my primary job is to advise the chair, but I will also answer questions from members during meetings if I can. If you can give me your questions in advance, that makes my advice much better because I have time to dig around in here and try to find answers, especially if it's something a little complicated. And my email's on the slides. The slides are going to be posted. So are there any questions? It was a lot very fast. Yes, ma'am. This slide?
You talked about making sure during the debate that you had pros and cons represented by the people who are speaking, had the
Mhm.
floor, and were offering up. How are you able to make sure that you've gotten representation from both sides of that? I was just curious, do you just ask out there? Do I have anyone else who wants to come down on pro or the con?
Basically, that's what's going to happen.
Okay.
The
Thank
person
you.
will come up, if they seem to be on the same side as the previous speaker, the chair may stop them and say, is there anybody who's on the other side of this issue um, who wants to talk to this point? And if you discover you've got 6 people lined up, but everybody in the room agrees with, wants to vote aye anyway, you kind of start scratching your head at that point about, well, why do we need to make speeches? We can just vote. Everybody already agrees. So that's one of the reasons we're looking for the pro and cons. Anything else? I think it's your baby again.
Thanks, Dan. And you'll often see me sort of caucusing with Dan over to the side during meetings, asking how I should be doing something. So I definitely rely on him. Okay, I just want to move into a really brief introduction to the standing committees, or the so-called faculty committees, that are mandated in the faculty manual. As I said, these are committees that are sort of permanent. They exist all the time. They don't sort of appear, do work, and then disappear or disband. And they are there for specific reasons that are detailed under each committee description. The one I'm starting with here is the steering committee. The steering committee is actually sort of the executive committee, if you will, of the Senate. And so it consists of myself, the Senate officers, as well as a number of chairs of some of these standing committees that come and meet with us. We typically meet right before the main Senate meeting. The purpose of the steering committee, well, we have several purposes that are laid out in the faculty manual. One of our important purposes is to discuss matters that have come to the attention of a committee, or in many cases that have come to my attention as chair, things that we know are sort of coming down the pipeline that might impact faculty, to discuss how should the Senate address those things, whether we should have, bring it up at the full Senate meeting, or whether we should first ask a standing committee to deliberate on it and then bring a report to the Senate, and that kind of question. The provost also sits on the steering committee with us, and it's a really great opportunity for us to talk to the provost about her plans and upcoming activities that she has, initiatives that may impact faculty and that kind of thing, and for us to give her feedback, which I think she finds useful, and also for us to plan whether and decide whether any of those things might need Senate action. We also play a role in establishing so-called ad hoc, or also called special committees. These are short-lived committees that are put together for a specific purpose. They do their job, and then they're disbanded. Typically, the lifetime of one of these ad hoc committees is a year, but it can be longer depending on the task. The Senate Steering Committee basically deliberates on that, puts together a description of that committee, and that's one of our main jobs. We also play a really important role in putting together the nominating slate of candidates to fill vacancies on the standing committees. We do all that in the spring, so you'll see that process unfold in the spring. Okay, so that's the steering committee. Here are the current steering committee members from the standing committee. So these are the chairs of the standing committees that sit also on the steering committee. Again, these slides are already available on the Senate website, and they'll be there for you to look at later if you want to. I am going to go through some of these committees briefly, and that brings me then to the full list of the standing committees that's in the faculty manual. So as you can see by their names, each of these committees is assigned to a different area that impacts shared governance or that impacts faculty. I'm not going to go through every single one of these committees today, but I would like to highlight a few of the committees that have been very active lately, and I consider to be like pretty important for faculty pretty much every year. I mean, almost all of these committees will occasionally have important business that comes before them, but there are certain committees that are always dealing with very important matters, and I'd like to go through some of those. So admissions is one of those committees. They work very closely, and here's the current chair of admissions for this academic year. Admissions works very hand in hand with Scott Verzile in the admissions office, especially in regards to policies. So, for example, Last year, admissions brought a motion to the Senate floor for debate and vote to extend the suspension of the gosh, I'm having trouble talking today. What am I trying to say? The testing exemption for SAT tests that we started during COVID. Admissions brought a recommendation to the Senate to extend that exemption to basically be test optional. There's the phrase I was looking for the indefinite future, with a requirement that we periodically review, the student body under the test optional rules and see whether or not we're seeing any problems due to our test optional policy. So that was one example of kind of a weighty, important thing that admissions did last year. Okay, Dan already mentioned curricula and courses, a very active committee, actually compared to, well, except for maybe UCTP and maybe the most busy committee that we have and standing committees. Their job is to review proposals for new courses and programs and to make a recommendation. They have a tough job because they're basically looking at many, many proposals from across the university, and they have to weigh whether or not this is duplicating effort. They have to look at how the course is being taught. If there's external vendors involved with the course, that can also be something that has to be looked at carefully, all those kind of issues. And so courses and curricula will tend to bring a report to the Senate pretty much every meeting, where they're presenting a list of courses that have come before them and they're making recommendations about that. And they're a very important committee. Michael Dixon is the new chair for that committee, and looking forward to seeing him every meeting bringing a report to us. Okay, Faculty Advisory Committee, or FAC. That's another one that Dan mentioned that's very important. They are the sort of gatekeeper committee, if you will. Maybe, I don't know, gatekeeper might be strong, but they're basically the committee that is the final stop for changes to the faculty manual before they come before the Senate. So Faculty Advisory Committee has to, regardless of where the proposal to change the faculty manual has originated, the Faculty Advisory Committee has to be involved in reviewing that proposal and then bringing a final proposal to the Senate floor for discussion about modifying the faculty manual. So they play a really important role. The faculty manual is a living document. We're changing it all the time. Every year there are changes to it that get voted on each year. And so this is a really active and important committee. Mark Manette and Bill Sudduth, who's in the audience. And then Mark, you're back there too. They're here in person. In fact, we'll be hearing from Mark in just a few minutes. Okay, Faculty Budget Committee. This is a relatively new committee to the Senate that was established a few years back. I don't remember the exact year, but Faculty Budget Committee their job is to essentially interface with the administration on matters of budget, to be involved in developing, reviewing budget policy and budget priorities. Again, we don't make any final decisions because that's not in our purview in shared governance, but they are their job is to basically report to the Senate and to faculty about budgetary issues. They are also they play an important role also in helping to make sure unit budget committees, which is a brand new thing that was established last year, that unit budget committees, such as at the department level, that they receive or college or school level, that they receive training on the budgetary process, which is quite complex. So that they can understand the information and documents and things that they're given to review at the college or school level. So, yeah, a very important committee. Christy Martin is the new chair of that committee. Faculty Welfare is another committee that's very active. Their job is to essentially hear from faculty things that impact their welfare, their quality of life here at the university. And then to make recommendations sometimes about policy changes or other things that can improve the faculty experience here at USC. So, for example, I know handicap parking was one last year that was a big item that the Faculty Welfare Committee considered. We also, I think, talked about maybe a more weighty example. Faculty Welfare Committee talked about how the university responds to online harassment and doxing of faculty and that kind of thing. So they have some very important work that they do. Amy and Susie are the current, Amy Freeman and Susie Hardy are the current chairs of that committee. You'll notice some of the committees have co-chairs. That is something we allow when it's difficult to find a single person that wants to chair the whole year. So there are several committees with co-chairs. Scholastic Standards and Petitions, which is chaired by Bill Knapp. That's another one that it's been fairly active lately. They basically have a lot of work analyzing recommended changes to, for example, the academic bulletin or academic policies at the university. So some of you may have heard, as an example that I can just pull out of my hat. Some of you may have heard that there is a proposal to, or maybe you haven't heard, and this will be news to you, that there is a proposal to alter exam times from 2.5 to 2 hours in order to create a new exam time slot for final exams. This is for final exams, to create a new exam slot that would be useful for mass exams of very large courses that meet at where they have many sections that meet at different times. And so that's something that Scholastic Standards and Petitions is looking at. Of course, it's something that each college and school is also looking at on their own and giving feedback to the provost about that proposal. So that's an example of some of the important stuff that they do. The Faculty Senate IT Committee is also a very active committee, currently chaired by Elizabeth Regan and Sarah Carroll. That one of the big things that faculty IT, well, they've been actually very busy the last few years because there's been a lot of technology changes at the university. So, of course, we've migrated exclusively to Blackboard Ultra Course View. That Faculty IT Committee was involved in advising the provost on that somewhat after the fact, unfortunately. But nonetheless, once we realized that faculty needed to have input into that, they became heavily involved in that. They also do that's just one example. They also do a IT satisfaction survey every year, which hopefully some of you have responded to, which then they report back to the vice president of IT at the university about those results and discuss those with them. So they're also a very active committee because of how important IT is to basically every facet of the university. We've already mentioned UCTP, which all the tenure track folks in here probably are already familiar with. This committee is the final faculty input into decisions on tenure and promotion for tenure track faculty. They are a very busy committee. They handle a lot of files that come through every year. So they're pretty much busy from September to May every year, or at least April every year. And their job is essentially to review the process of how a file went through the TMP process from the unit to the dean to the provost, and to make sure that policies and procedures were followed properly, that the faculty was treated fairly during the process. They also help devise and work with units to devise guidelines for developing unit criteria for tenure and promotion, which is another very important role they have. And so this is a very active committee. Lauren Sklarov is the current chair of UCTP. Instructional development are also called INDEV. You'll notice we have a lot of shortened names for some of these committees. INDEV is historically, I don't know if they were that active, but they certainly have become active in the last few years. Their job is to basically formulate policies centered around educational requirements, curriculum, and that kind of thing. So, for example, they also became heavily involved in the provost's decision to transition to Blackboard Ultra Course View, and it was largely through the efforts of INDEV and the IT committee that the provost that we basically requested that the provost allow an exemption for that transition for courses that needed either more time or that had a strong pedagogical reason not to transition right away. It was also through INDEV's efforts last year that we got the provost to work with us to create a long-term LMS committee that is looking at long-term, should we stick with Blackboard after the current contract expires, or should we transition to something else? And so INDEV, the reason they became involved is because of how central the LMS, the learning management system, is to how we teach, right? And so they became heavily involved in that process. So they've been very active lately. One of the current things they're working on for this year is related to course evaluations and peer review of teaching and best practices for that, how to integrate best practices into that process, as one example of some of the business that they have coming before them. So Stephanie Armstrong and Kunio Hara, who is in the audience, Kunio is here with us today. They are the co-chairs of INDEV. Okay, with that, that's it for my brief overview of faculty standing committees. You'll see the chairs of these committees at the Senate meetings. If they have business to come before the Senate, they will come and talk to you and present that business. Every year they present an annual report to the Senate, which we'll be posting fairly soon for the September 11th Senate meeting, detailing the activities from the previous year. So there's a lot of interaction between the Senate and these standing committees. And really, if you have let's say a problem or an issue that you think needs to be addressed, and you bring that to me, depending on the nature of the issue, often I will first ask a standing committee to look at it, because they're really designed, if it fits with their purview, they are designed to deliberate on it and really deeply think about the issue before it comes to the faculty senate, so that we have a really kind of meaningful discussion about it. Okay, and with that, I'll stop for quick questions on this. We will have a longer Q&A at the end, but any questions on the standing committees? No? Pretty straightforward. Great. All right. So at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Mark Manette, who is president. Well, he's a professor in English, but also president of the USC chapter of the AAUP. And he's going to be talking to you a little bit about that organization.
Hey, thanks, Wayne. Thanks to the Faculty Senate leadership for giving me some time. Can everybody hear me? Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm Mark Manette. I'm the chapter president for the USC Columbia AAUP chapter. It's my second year in that role. We're a fairly new chapter. We've been around, I think, 6 years now. You may remember, or some of you are newer to the university may remember a controversy around a past president who was also a general. That's kind of provided the spark for reforming the chapter. But there is a longer history of an AAUP chapter. So the AAUP is the American Association of University Professors. It's a national organization. Let me give you a sense of the mission here: to advance academic freedom and shared governance, to define professional values, fundamental professional values and standards for higher education, to promote the economic security of faculty and all those engaged in teaching and research in higher ed, to help the higher ed community organize to make our goals a reality, and then finally, to ensure higher ed's contribution to the greater good. So we advocate around issues that are directly important to faculty, but also with the big picture in mind, as most faculty have that big picture in mind of what higher ed can contribute to society. So oftentimes we talk about our mission, the key planks of it: academic freedom, tenure, which is really about economic and intellectual security, how best to secure academic freedom and the economic security of the profession, and shared governance, right? So these are key planks that we're thinking about. So I appreciate being invited here. I spoke at last year's new faculty senator orientation, and but I came in late this year. So maybe somebody has said this to you already, but I just want to reinforce that the faculty senate matters. It can seem sometimes, and some of the talk around campus can be, you sit there and you grade and let the kind of the world roll on past you, as in man, then every once in a while somebody gets in an argument, it gets kind of exciting, but otherwise we kind of rubber stamp things. And I was a faculty senator for 6 years, so I speak for some experience and a personal journey in the faculty senate. But I want to just reinforce that the faculty senate matters, and it can matter, and I believe that it really has mattered, especially in the recent past. And that means you as faculty senators matter, right? You vote on all the things that you've heard about here today, including changes to the faculty manual, which is basically our handbook, our agreement with the university about what the rules of the road are and the matters that are particularly important to the faculty, right? You have a say in that. It's hugely important. You have a say in curriculum. Actually, let me get to that. So how do you matter? You matter as legislators, right? So if you look at the faculty manual, here's the list. This is not just about me not knowing how to organize PowerPoint, but it's to convey visually, right, that there's a lot of responsibilities. Standards of admission, registration, requirements for the granting of earned degrees, curriculum, instruction, research, extracurricular activities, discipline of students, educational policy, standards of the university, matters pertaining to the conduct of faculty affairs, including the discipline of faculty. These are all areas in which you all have legislative power now as faculty senators, and the collective group does. That's a lot of responsibility. And if you don't use it, you lose it, I think is a good rule of thumb here. That is to say, there are people, not necessarily the administration, but lots of people maybe in the State House and other places who would love to make some of these decisions for us. You matter as communicators, communicating to the other faculty in your unit, right, whom you represent, about the work that's being done, about the issues that are coming before the Senate, many of which are very important, and also to communicate to the faculty senate what your faculty are telling you is important to them and how they feel about the issues that are in front of the university and in front of the faculty senate. So I encourage you to email your faculty, let them know about what's happening at the faculty senate and what's important in a way that you can think about what might interest them, what might they find important. You, as faculty senators, matter as question askers. So part of every faculty senate meeting is the president, if he's in the country, gives a presentation, right? The provost, if she's around, gives a presentation. Other university administrators, maybe in their place, give presentations. Wayne gives a report and presentation, and you have an opportunity to ask questions and to provide moments of accountability, civil accountability, I'll say, civil accountability, right? Where your faculty are asking questions about what's going on with this. So there's some issues that came up recently. What's going on with this? What's going on with that? It's a moment where you can ask the administration for clarification on statements that they've made, on actions that they've taken. Along with that, kind of holding the administration accountable, not necessarily in an adversarial sense, right? But providing greater transparency is the kind of a flip side to that is that you matter as problem solvers, right? Kind of the responsibility of the faculty senate, not just to complain, right? But to find ways to address the problems in a collaborative way, hopefully collaborative way that the university faces. Because in the absence of the faculty senate offering solutions, there's a void that's going to be occupied by someone, right? So the faculty senate matters, you as faculty senators matter, and the AAUP is here to help. So we provide a number of resources that I encourage you to take advantage of when issues come up in front of the faculty senate. Just to run through a few of them, we run the AAUP National Organization has a website at aaup.org that you can go to. There's news, there's resources, there's contact information. There's a search bar, right? So let's say a bill gets introduced in the faculty senate or a piece of legislation in the faculty senate with certain terms in it, like contingency, right? Professional track faculty, tenure. You can go and search for resources on the website. The AAUP also publishes regularly Academ, the magazine of the AAUP, which you can access through university library resources, right? There's a QR code that will link you to the catalog entry for it, but we all get free access here through the University of South Carolina libraries. We also get free access to what's called the Red Book, kind of colloquially or in AAUP circles, which is the published set of standards and reports from the AAUP. So the AAUP's policy documents and reports available through university libraries as well. So that link should work still, I'm pretty sure. If you can't find it, let me know. And the Red Book is a particularly important resource because in the faculty manual, AAUP policy provides an important point of reference, right? So it's a professional organization founded in 1915 committed to the economic and intellectual security of the faculty and their participation meaningfully in a collaborative way in shared governance. And in the faculty manual, we have this statement: the University of South Carolina generally adheres in principle to the most recent standards of the American Association of University Professors regarding the rights, privileges, and benefits accorded faculty members. Right? So if you want to know what those are or should be, you can go to the Red Book, right? The AAUP policy documents and reports, and search in it and try to find a statement that's relevant to something that's facing the faculty senate or higher ed. You can also contact your local chapter. Of course, I encourage you to do that as well. One of the things that the AAUP chapter here and across the country in different chapters is constantly working on is moving the university closer to kind of what are generally or broadly recognized as standards that are most protective of faculty's economic and intellectual security and their role in shared governance. So also in the faculty manual is this statement: where university policies differ from those standards, the regulations stated herein or as subsequently modified by the university shall apply. Okay. AUP lawyers tells me that introduces a lot of wiggle room to not follow standards in the Red Book, some of which, you know, there may be a good reason for, others there may not. But what it kind of provides the chapter is, and what I'd like you as senators to consider, is the need to identify ways to get more explicit protective standards in the faculty manual. So that's something that we consistently work on. So for instance, over the last couple of years, we've had some successes. For instance, a year ago last spring, we were able to add some language providing greater explicit protections around academic freedom to the faculty manual. We have this statement: the university adheres to the 1940 Statement of Principles on Academic Freedom and Tenure, as well as the association's 1970 interpretive comments. We updated that to include the 1970 interpretive comments, and that's important for a couple of reasons. Specifically, what did we get? We added explicit protections for freedom in intramural speech. That is your speech in shared governance, right? So this was not explicit in the faculty manual previous to this update. So say, you know, you said something on the floor of the faculty senate, your chair didn't like it, your dean didn't like it. There was no explicit protection in the faculty manual. If they wanted to mess with your job, right, there's no explicit protection against that. So we managed to add that to the manual. We also added language to make sure that, or managed to successfully work with the faculty senate to add language to clarify that academic freedom and the protections in the manual apply to all faculty members, including tenure track, professional track, part-time faculty, and teaching assistants, which was an important win, I think. Other gains to ensure, some of you may have read the Chronicle of Higher Education today and budget shenanigans at the University of North Carolina, in the University of North Carolina system, or what happened in West Virginia. About a year ago last spring, we managed to get added to the faculty manual a requirement, and Wayne mentioned it, that the deans of all units, right, colleges, schools, the libraries, enable the faculty to form elected budget committees, elected faculty budget committees, to consult and collaborate with dean's office on financial matters and budgetary plans, that they would receive orientation and training in the USC and the unit's budgetary practices, they can access relevant budgetary data to their work, and that they can report to the faculty on their work and solicit feedback. So that's something we're continuing to work on with hopefully the University Faculty Budget Committee and faculty budget committee members in the different units to make sure that that language is adhered to and kind of followed through, and that faculty are empowered in their units. I didn't have time, unfortunately, before this to add another slide about the gains that were made in relation to professional track faculty. A lot of credit to, most of the credit to University Committee on Professional Track faculty for the language and protections that were added last year, along with the Faculty Advisory Committee and all the work that they did. But they were nice enough to humor the AAUP and let us join some of the meetings and to listen to what we thought might be added to it. And we were successful in advocating for some specific protections, including the use of AAUP language to ensure that professional track faculty who don't have service explicitly in their contract, their arms aren't twisted, they aren't required to do service work without compensation, right? Which is now explicit in the faculty manual. And we advocated for the introduction for the first time a standard for notice of non-reappointment. That, don't tell anyone, but we hope to get improved in the future in terms of when professional track faculty are notified whether their services for the next academic year are not going to be needed. And there's a lot of work to continue to be done, not necessarily through faculty manual changes, but also in providing feedback and guidance to units as they, from the faculty viewpoint, as they develop policies in their unit. Okay, So the Red Book provides important resources, thoughtful statements, and principles around all of these that I think most faculty find useful in kind of shaping their own positions on it, and that we as the AUP advocate around. And other resources, your USC Columbia campus chapter. Here's the list of officers. Mindy Fensky, who couldn't be here today, is the vice president. Sarah Wahid from history is our secretary. Saber Custer for nursing, our treasurer. And then we have two at-large members, Jacqueline Wong from sociology and Mark Makata from public health. You can find us online. We have an open forum on Facebook, USC Columbia AUP. That's for all faculty to contribute. The statements on there aren't the AUP official statements. It's a place where faculty can share observations and ideas and news about what's going on. Our email address recently updated there to reflect we're USC Columbia AUP, and a not so beautiful but very functional website that's easy to make changes on, a Google site. Other resources, you all and the faculty in your unit. So we, the faculty, are the AUP's greatest resource. So maybe you agree with the AUP's agenda. You think it's important. You think the protection of economic and intellectual security of faculty and shared governance is important. And I appreciate your volunteering or your willingness to get shoved into the position of faculty senator. But the faculty are the AUP's greatest resource. Administrators ask us, how many members do you have? We don't tell them, right? But we can always have more members, more faculty contributing to the cause and the mission. Gives us greater resources from AUP National. Gives AUP National greater resources to advocate, and makes us more effective. So this is my pitch to join. The QR code takes you to the join page. You can see that dues are prorated. Maybe you can't because it's very small. If you click on the link, dues are prorated based on your income band. So it's not one size fits all for dues. And consider becoming active in your campus chapter. So support your faculty budget committees is one way to become active in your campus. In terms of what the chapter is doing, we're going to be working to support those faculty budget committees, like I said, ongoing effort to resist political interference in higher ed, which right now is largely focused around CRT and DEI legislation that seeks to kind of impose political and politicized definitions and standards on our practice on the university. And then a kind of recurring attacks on tenure, such as recently there was a kind of a attempt to overstep and be very prescriptive on what post-tenure review needs to look like here, which our administration managed to push back on, thankfully. We continue to work to advance the economic and intellectual security for all faculty. We're committed to addressing precarity in the profession to make sure that the new professional track faculty policy is implemented successfully and that we continue to make gains in terms of providing for the economic and intellectual security of professional track faculty. And in general, just to promote the use of AUP standards and procedures in the faculty manual and on campus. Just last thing I want to do is offer you a chance to come to our fall kickoff meeting Friday, September 20th at 2 p.m. Hopefully that's a time that works for some people. It's really difficult to schedule these meetings so that everyone who wants to or would like to can come. It's going to be held in the Travelstead Conference Room in the Museum of Education, which I think is Ward Law 125. We also have an interest survey that if you want more information from us, you can fill out and you can let us know what's important to you as faculty members. I have a paper form of this that I guess I'll put down there in case anybody wants to come up. I encourage you to, if you want to talk to me at the end of the session today, and the QR code links to the interest survey as well. But that's it from me. And all this is in the slides that are on the Faculty Senate's website. So please feel free to reach out, talk to me now or later, send me an email if you like. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you for giving me this time today. Should I take questions or should I just step aside? I don't know how much time I took.
Get to the mic since we have people online. If anybody has questions about anything we've covered today, including AAUP, please approach the microphone. And Matt, maybe you can let me know if anybody online chimes in. Okay.
About the unit caucuses, if it exists, whether or not we're invited, where they meet, all that information.
So by being in that unit, you are invited, or you are part of that caucus. The key limiting thing is who is the point of contact for the caucus, and are they active in communicating with the other caucus members? And that's really right now. That ball's in my court. I need to follow up now that we're starting the new semester. See if any of the folks that were previously points of contact have now left the Senate or are no longer willing to do it. So maybe I could just say stay tuned for that, and I'll try to get more information together for that, maybe to announce at the first Senate meeting if I can, on the 11th.
I'd like to address her question. If
Of
I
course,
may.
yeah.
I'm a senator in nursing, and the way that we go about it is we know who the other senators are. And if there's an issue that, like for instance, the professional track faculty issue, we're probably 2/3 professional track faculty in my unit. We actually polled the faculty and said, how would you like us to represent you? Do you want us? We gave them whatever the specific vote that was coming up. We said, how do you want us to vote? All our senators got together and we apportioned how many of us would vote this way or that based on what our unit wanted. So it was just us knowing each other and getting together and communicating, frankly, over email and deciding how we would handle things.
Yeah, that's a little tougher in arts and sciences where you have so many different folks, but I will try to get information at least for a point of contact that you can reach out to. I think in arts and sciences, it was mostly an email chain, right? That information would be distributed, and I don't know if they ever met in person. One or two times they met in person as a caucus. Yeah. Any other questions? I did want to also really quick mention, and I sent this out in a recent email to all the senators. Hopefully you got it, unless you were a recent addition, in which case maybe you didn't. But there was a link to, in the recent email I sent out, to a survey that the AAUP is conducting at universities in the South. And so if you get that and you're interested, I would recommend you respond to that survey. It's fairly short, took like about 5 minutes, but they're just gathering data on faculty at primarily South and Southeastern schools. So anybody not get that email? Okay. We are updating, Kiana's in the back there. We're updating the Senate database, which is what I currently rely on to send out these blast emails to the senators. Fingers crossed it will be, we'll have it ready, completely updated by the 11th, although part of it, we are waiting on units to tell us who their senators are. But definitely those of you that have contact, where your units have contacted us already, we are trying to catch up with those and get everybody in the database. If you would like that information, just come see me and I'll make sure I email it to you, or you could probably ask Mark as well. I think you have that survey link. Is that right?
Yeah, thanks for.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything about it, or you?
I can speak
Okay.
about it. I don't have the link in the
Yeah.
PowerPoint slide, but
If you logged into this meeting using our QR code at the beginning, I can definitely blast that out to everybody who attended the meeting today, if that would be good.
it provides this is I think the second round of this survey, which is conducted by faculty from the University of Georgia. You may know that we face some novel challenges in terms of political interference in higher ed and other challenges in the Southeast and the South region. And this provides data that can be used in relation to arguments that we want to make and representations for the impact of some of this political interference on faculty and their experiences there. So it is, I encourage everybody, I'm sorry that I forgot, I can't believe I forgot, to take some time. It's a very quick survey to complete it.
And that is an anonymous survey as well, in case you were wondering. Yeah.
Hey, yeah, I actually just had a question for Mark. When you were talking about the professional track faculty and the new provision that y'all are working and hopefully will get passed with repercussions and speaking in open governance, have y'all seen that here at USC with negative repercussions for like non-tenure track or professional track faculty?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. The language is in the faculty manual and has been for a year now, right? So it's patched. It's there. It's there for faculty to rely on if they are denied reappointment, promotion, appointment on grounds that they think are inappropriate, specifically that they said something in shared governance situations, right? And they feel like they're being retaliated against. for that speech. So now, correct me if I'm wrong, they can grieve a denial of reappointment or promotion around explicitly those grounds, right? That their academic freedom was violated, because academic freedom is explicitly described here as also applying to their speech and shared governance. Yeah, and I encourage, we haven't heard reports that, I'll just say the AUP chapter, explicit and specific reports of those denials, non-reappointment letters getting sent out. I'm not sure if the faculty ombuds has, which is another place to go, or if the grievance committee has heard those kinds of grievances specifically from professional track faculty. I will say, if you experience something like that, or stories, please share them with me or direct. We respect confidentiality of faculty. We have a committee set up called our Committee A, which deals with kind of casework around those instances, as well as use kind of the standard courses. I mean, what we see nationwide, right? When you see somebody, a faculty member is being fired, right, because of something they said, it's pretty consistently. I mean, Florida may be an exception in these days, but it's very consistently non-tenure track faculty, or what we define here as professional track faculty, or sometimes adjunct faculty, who are facing those repercussions for their speech, whether it's in intramural speech, like some guy in Texas, right, he was fired and then rehired because people caught wind to this, because he had a conversation about parking with the president that the president didn't appreciate, right? We've extended those protections explicitly here. So sorry to go on. Do you have anything to add?
No, I think Mark covered it well. That language is I encourage everyone to go and actually read the faculty manual. I know it's a lot, but there's some really good stuff in there, and it's good to know what is in there, and then maybe what we need to add or what needs to be modified, which it's a living document. We're constantly looking at it and assessing what we need to change or improve in it. So, okay, any other questions? All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody in person and online who attended today. I appreciate it. I hope I see all of you in a couple of weeks at the first Faculty Senate meeting on the 11th of September, back in this room. Just a reminder, next week on the 4th is the general faculty meeting, which of course we're all invited to. All faculty are invited to that. That'll also be in this room and also streamed on Teams. I anticipate it may be possibly a lively meeting. I don't know. I guess we'll see. There's a few things going on campus that people are quite upset about. So, but please also try to attend or maybe view that meeting as well. All right. Thanks, everyone.